I'm Cindy Clark, the Director of Commercial Initiatives and Strategy at the Focused Ultrasound Foundation. Our staff frequently get asked how much money and time does it take to commercialize a FUS product? The short answer, a lot of both, and both are in short supply. This presentation explains why it takes millions of dollars and years of development to bring a FUS product to market. It also gives a high-level overview of the process for raising money. There are a number of factors that influence the time and money required to develop medical devices. One of them is the regulatory pathway. For a lower risk medical device that already has a predicate or similar device in the market, the average capital required is $31 million, and it can take anywhere from a year to 7 years to take the product from benchtop to FDA authorization. A complex, high-risk device takes about $94 million in capital, and the development timeline can take between 5 to more than 10 years. Historically, FUS companies have been running higher than average. Insight Tech, for example, with a FUS device for essential tremors, has raised $664 million in equity over the last 23 years, and their revenues are still not greater than their expenses. Another company, Histosonics, which recently got FDA de novo clearance for a FUS device to treat liver cancer, raised $253 million over 14 years. Another factor that influences the time and money required to develop a FUS product is the reimbursement pathway. Many companies make the mistake of narrowly focusing on the regulatory approval and are surprised when it takes an additional year or even up to a decade after FDA approval to obtain broad insurance coverage from the government and private insurance companies. FDA requires data to support safety and efficacy. Insurance companies want that too, but they also want to understand the cost effectiveness of the product, which is not required by the FDA for product authorization. It's important to understand the reimbursement path before raising money, so the plan and the budget for clinical studies can include economic endpoints. Here we've broken down the time to develop a FUS product into stages. It can take up to 2 years to finalize the prototype, another 2 years to test the device in animals, and then up to 10 years to complete human clinical studies. For a device that's classified as low risk, best case scenario, it takes 5 years to go from prototype to an exit event. On the opposite spectrum, successfully commercializing a complex or high-risk FUS device could be 25 years or more in the making. For entrepreneurs putting together a business plan, a good rule of thumb is to build in extra time to reach important milestones and plan for extra funding to meet those milestones. Device development is inherently risky for investors. 70% of companies will fail, 50% within the first 5 years. Based on the data the foundation collects, FUS manufacturers have been running better than the general device statistics, with 12% of manufacturers that have ceased to do business in the last 16 years since the foundation's been tracking them. Investor risk varies with the stage of development. The risk is highest for the friends and family that provide a company with its first equity funding. As the product development matures, that risk goes down, so by the time of FDA submission, the risk is significantly less. The type of investors that'll invest in the company also change based on the product development status. Formal venture capital funds generally won't consider an investment until the product is in human clinical trials. Private equity funds typically require 1 to 3 years of revenue before they'll consider investing. To maximize return for shareholders, it's important to plan carefully and raise only as much money as is needed to get to the company's next value inflection point. Non-dilutive funding is funding provided to the company without equity or stock in exchange. This type of funding can come from grants or incubators and can range from a few thousand to several $1,000,000. Small business grants from the federal government are a great way to get a company off the ground and finalize a prototype. To learn more about each source of non-dilutive funding, click on the links in this slide. Each type of investor has different goals and objectives. The earliest investors, like friends and family and seed investors, are usually the investors that are willing to wait the longest for an exit. Since there will likely be a mix of all of these types of investors over time, it's important to manage their expectations on timing. With each successive round, if existing investors don't participate, their equity investment will be diluted by the newer investors. Many VC and private equity funds have established parameters for investment size and runway to exit. Their funds are raised, and the investors in their funds expect these parameters to be adhered to when the fund is making investments. As an example, say a company raised a Series B and had a 5-year exit plan, but it ultimately took longer to get there. In that case, the fund and the fund's shareholders could become dissatisfied, which could make shareholder management more complicated. The cost of capital mirrors the risk profile. Capital costs more for risky investments. The cost goes down as the product is de-risked. The investors with links on this slide are described in more detail in the backup slides. This chart lays out the long checklist of must-haves when raising money. The must-haves are highlighted in blue. Friends and family have the most flexibility. They might not need a formal business plan or a full management team to invest in a company, but by the time a company is raising venture capital, basically everything on this checklist is needed except revenue, a strategic partner, and the commercial product finalized. For a Series A raise, the company needs a full business plan, regulatory strategy, including a pre-submission meeting with the FDA, reimbursement strategy, animal and published clinical data, an experienced CEO who successfully led a medical device company, and a scientific advisory board. These next few slides are some insider insights we collected from our team that are meant specifically for FUS companies raising money. The first one's been mentioned at least once in this presentation, but it's really important, so I'll say it again. Know the regulatory and reimbursement pathways before raising money. The amount of time and money that are needed in the plan are critically dependent on those pathways. Understand the competitive landscape and clearly articulate that understanding to potential investors. If the pitch states that the company has no competition, investors may not invest. In general, FUS companies are competing against surgery, other non-invasive devices, and even drugs. And not just the products that are currently in the market, but products that are being developed too. It's certainly possible to define the market narrowly in such a way that a company can honestly assert that no one else can do it the same way. But the potential investor can't assess whether the management team understands the whole picture. Competition isn't bad. It's not acknowledging it that's a deal breaker for some investors. It's long been the case that a successful product must address a significant unmet medical need. In the past, medical device companies could charge more for the innovation, but in today's difficult capital markets and with the skyrocketing costs of healthcare, providers may not buy the product, insurance companies may not provide reimbursement for the product, and investors may not invest in the company if the product costs more than other treatments. Some inventor founders in my career don't think that a formal business plan is necessary to raise a seed round. Maybe there's some leeway for an IT company that's only going to need a couple $1 million in order to get to revenue. But for a FUS company that is going to need $30 million or more to get the product on the market, a formal business plan right out of the gate is a must-have. Friends or family might invest without a plan, but a sophisticated investor is not going to invest based on a PowerPoint presentation. It takes 1 to 3 months to write a compelling plan. At least one person outside the company should review it. Then many of the answers to key investor questions will be prepared before the meeting with a great potential investor. The plan shows investors that the management team knows how to get to the next step and have thought about the process and contingencies. It proves their ability to forecast and predict, even though the plan might change every 6 months. And although I've said it already, no matter how good the plan is, always add a couple of years and several $1 million to the plan for unanticipated delays and expenses. During the fundraising process, there's going to be a due diligence period where at least the lead investor will validate all of the company's statements and assumptions. Creating a well-organized virtual data room will make this process go faster with a greater likelihood of successful outcome. Use a question and answer tracker. This will streamline the responses to repeat questions. Organize key folders in the data room, including scientific data, development plans, all of the documents that support the business plan assumptions, the legal and financial corporate documents, information on the intellectual property, and the financial model, including a profit and loss statement, cash flow statement, and balance sheet. Some investors are not going to agree to sign a non-disclosure agreement, so be sure to include separate folders for documents with confidential information redacted. The characteristics of the investor that invests in the company are important to the company's success. An investor should do more than just provide the company with money. They should be able to make other contributions too, like domain expertise, industry connections, and follow-on funding. There are challenges to having a large number of small individual investors. They are not only complicated to manage, but they could deter a sophisticated venture capital investment. And FUS companies are going to need those sophisticated investors to fund the clinical trials that cost millions of dollars. Although it might be tempting to raise money through multiple friends and family early on, it could be detrimental in the long run. Another piece of advice: carefully manage investor expectations about the development timeline. Clearly communicate delays and plans for mitigation. Almost every company experiences delays. How the delays are handled could make a huge difference in shareholder relationships. Because few investors are willing to cash out early investors like friends and family before an exit, it's important that investors understand how long it's going to take to get there. Many FUS companies have been started by the scientific inventors of the technology. These entrepreneurs are smart and devoted, but they might not have experience raising money or navigating the complicated regulatory and reimbursement pathways required for success. It's true, those things can be learned, but no sophisticated investor is going to invest millions of dollars in a company that's not led by a CEO who's had at least one successful exit under their belt. And learning those things takes too much time, negatively impacting competitive advantage. My advice: bring on an experienced CEO as soon as possible. By the time of a company's Series B, a full management team to support the CEO will need to be in place. And to ensure success, the team needs to be a team of rock stars, because no matter how good the business plan is, a mediocre team will not succeed. While we're talking about the team, the board and the scientific advisory board should also be assembled as early as possible. Not only do they provide invaluable insights to the company, but they strongly influence investors' interest in the company. I've heard from some founders that they don't want to bring on outside investors because of dilution. Unless the founder is a multimillionaire and can afford to fund $30 million or more in costs for clinical studies, dilution is going to happen. Pivotal clinical studies are generally beyond the scope of grant dollars, so a FUS product cannot be commercialized with grant dollars alone. Even if it was possible, that money comes too slowly. So dilution is a simple math equation. Without outside investors, the company won't be successful. With no dilution, the founders own 100% of an unsuccessful company, or zero. If the founders exited with 10% of the equity in the company and the company exits for $100 million, that's $10 million for the founder. The founders and friends and family investors are going to be diluted significantly. Be wary of bringing on investors that don't understand that, or that don't have deep pockets to keep participating in each funding round to maintain their percentage ownership if that's important to them. When commercializing a medical device, a sense of extreme urgency is absolutely critical to success. Every month of delay can mean millions of dollars in lost revenue and potential loss of market share. Get the product to market as fast and most directly as possible. save incremental improvements for the next generation device, which can be developed and launched after the first one, and laser focus on the indication. Use those non-dilutive grant dollars to fund development of the second and third indications, but don't use the precious equity for those. Work on those after the first indication generates revenue to fund the development. I'll conclude with 3 final insights. When raising money, make sure the milestones for each tranche will get the company to its next value inflection point. If the money being raised will only get halfway through the prototype, that's not a good inflection point. The inflection point is prototype completion. So if necessary, increase the size of the raise. These milestones will help attract investors at the appropriate risk stage. Every funding round needs at least one group that'll lead. This group will do the heavy lifting for due diligence, and it has to be an organization that all of the other investors have confidence in. Some VC funds and angels never lead, so know their process and build the investor pool accordingly. Avoid valuing the company for as long as possible. In the early stages, it's hard to do accurately. If the valuation's too high, it can discourage investors in future rounds, or it could result in what we call a down round, where the company value is less than the previous round. This causes even more dilution for the existing shareholders. And be careful of the valuation inflection point when a company changes from development to revenue generating. When the product is launched, plan for at least 3 years of cash in the bank if possible, giving the company enough time to generate revenues so the commercial valuation, which is a multiple of revenues, adequately represents the value of the company. If not, the best case scenario is a significant down round. And at worst, it could mean the product made it all the way to commercialization, but still failed, which is not good for the company, its shareholders, or the patients that the product can help. In summary, it takes 5 to 10 years or more to develop a FUS product and 30 million or more in capital. Every decision made along the way can make it easier or harder to raise the money needed in a timely fashion. Efficiently navigating the diverse stakeholders that participate in the complex process of development, funding, authorization, and payment for a FUS product requires decades of medtech startup experience. Time is of the essence. Every month of delay can cost millions of dollars in revenue and potential loss of market share. This presentation gives an overview of the steps that are needed to fund a FUS company. Throughout the presentation, there are links to slides with even more detail on them. References citing it in the presentation are also in the backup materials. For introductions to investors, help with a business plan, or connections to experts, please reach out to FUS Partners. Our email address is fuspartners@fusfoundation.org. We will be happy to help. Thanks for listening.